installment of our literary afternoon at the Blueberry Patch. The first one was Christopher Hitchens. We had a wake for him of sorts. And then Jack Kerouac. And now we're doing Richard Brautigan. I first got familiar with Mr. Brautigan in the early 70s in graduate school in British Columbia, and I was in the middle of reading, Proust and Balzac and Dickens and Faulkner and blah blah blah, and I had never heard of Richard Brautigan, though he was kind of around up there, and I never met him, but he was around a lot, and he was very famous already. Trout fishing in America had come out and gone nationwide, and anyway, it was forced on me, and I gladly read it and was glad I did. Anyway, okay. What I've been doing, this is a attempt to rekindle interest in the literary arts here at the Blueberry Patch and elsewhere, and I find it really needs to be done. And anyway, I drag along with me a copy of this brief history of the English grammar by Scott and Buck. Gertrude Buck was a professor of literature at Vassar, and this book was written in 1906. Anyway, I stumbled across it and thought it was the most concise and beautiful statement about the English language. And I've never heard it more concise. Anyway, until I get strangled and stopped from doing this, I'm going to begin each session with this paragraph from that volume in 1906. Anyway, it is sometimes said that grammar is a collection of rules for correct speaking and writing, but this is not strictly true. The rules of grammar are like the laws of any physical science, such as chemistry, physics, astronomy, or physical geography. These sciences are not a collection of rules telling the winds and the tides, for instance, what they must do, or prescribing how a certain acid and a certain base shall unite. They only report and explain what happens. And so grammar does not say to us directly, you must speak thus and so, but only English-speaking people at the present time do speak such and so, for the following reasons. Knowing this fact, we shall undoubtedly choose to speak so too, in order to be easily and precisely understood by others, or to avoid the appearance of eccentricity or ignorance. But grammar goes no further than to report and explain the usages of the language, leaving us to choose for ourselves whether we shall follow them or not. So the laws of physics do not command the tides, and the rules of grammar do not command us. They merely report what is happening. Okay. Well, we are happy to have Dan and Juju back with us for their participation in this effort, and we are going to be doing selections of Richard Brautigan's works, and I'm going to read from Trout Fishing in America a few passages. One is called A Walden Pond for Winos. The autumn carried along with it, like the roller coaster of a flesh-eating plant, port wine and the people who drank that sweet, dark wine. People long since gone, except for me. Always wary of the police, we drink in the safest place we could find, in the park across from the church. There were 3 poplar trees in the middle of the park, and there was a statue of Benjamin Franklin in front of the trees. We sat there and drank port. At home, my wife was pregnant. I would call on the telephone after I finished work and say, I won't be home for a little while. I'm going to have a drink with some friends. The 3 of us huddled in the park talking. They were both broken down artists from New Orleans, where they had drawn pictures of tourists in Pirates Alley. Now in San Francisco, with the cold autumn wind upon them, they had decided that the future held only 2 directions. They were either going to open up a flea circus or commit themselves to an insane asylum. So they talked about it while they drank the wine. They talked about how to make little clothes for fleas by pasting pieces of colored paper on their backs. They said the way that you trained fleas was to make them dependent upon you for food. This was done by letting them feed off you at an appointed hour. They talked about making little flea wheelbarrows and pool tables and bicycles. They would charge 50 cents admission for their flea circus. The business was certain to have a future to it. Perhaps they would even get on the Ed Sullivan Show. They, of course, did not have their fleas yet, but they could be easily obtained from a white cat. Then they decided that the fleas that lived on Siamese cats would probably be more intelligent than the fleas that lived on just ordinary alley cats. It only made sense that drinking intelligent blood would make intelligent fleas. And so it went on until it was exhausted, and we went and bought another 5th of port wine and returned to the trees and Benjamin Franklin. Now it was close to sunset, and the earth was beginning to cool off in the correct manner of eternity, and the office girls were returning like penguins from Montgomery Street. They looked at us hurriedly and mentally registered winos. Then the 2 artists talked about committing themselves to an insane asylum for the winter. They talked about how warm it would be in the insane asylum with television, clean sheets, and soft beds, hamburger gravy over mashed potatoes, a dance once a week with the lady kooks, clean clothes, a locked razor, and lovely young student nurses. Ah, yes, there was a future in the insane asylum. No winter spent there could be a total loss. Room 208, Hotel Trout Fishing in America. Half a block from Broadway and Columbus is Hotel Trout Fishing in America, a cheap hotel. It is very old and run by some Chinese. They are young and ambitious Chinese, and the lobby is filled with the smell of Lysol. The Lysol sits like another guest on the stuffed furniture, reading a copy of the Chronicle, the sports section. It is the only furniture I've ever seen in my life that looks like baby food. And the Lysol sits asleep next to an old Italian pensioner who listens to the heavy ticking of the clock and dreams of eternity's golden pasta, sweet basil, and Jesus Christ. The Chinese are always doing something to the hotel. One week they paint a lower banister. On the next they put some new wallpaper on part of the third floor. No matter how many times you pass that part of the third floor, you cannot remember the color of the wallpaper or what design is. All you know is that part of the wallpaper is new. It is different from the old wallpaper, but you cannot remember what that looks like either. One day the Chinese take a bed out of a room, lean it up against the wall, and it stays there for a month. You get used to seeing it, then you go by one day and it's gone. You wonder where it went. I remember the first time I went inside Hotel Trout Fishing in America. It was with a friend to meet some people. "I'll tell you what's happening," he said. "She's an ex-hustler who works for the telephone company. He went to medical school for a while during the Great Depression. Then he went into show business. After that, he was an errand boy for an abortion mill in Los Angeles. He took a fall and did some time in San Quentin. I think you'll like them. They're good people. He met her a couple of years ago in North Beach. She was hustling for a spade pimp. It's kind of weird. Most women have the temperament to be a whore, but she's one of these rare women who just don't have it, the whore temperament. She's a Negro, too. She was a teenage girl living on a farm in Oklahoma. The pimp drove by one afternoon and saw her playing in the front yard. He stopped his car and got out and talked to her father for a while. I guess he gave her father some money. He came up with something good because her father told her to go and get her things. So she went with the pimp. Simple as that. He took her to San Francisco and turned her out, and she hated it. He kept her in line by terrorizing her all the time. He was a real sweetheart. She had some brains, so she got herself a job with the telephone company during the day, and he had her hustling at night. When Art took her away from him, he got pretty mad. A good thing and all that. He used to break into Art's hotel room in the middle of the night and put a switchblade to Art's throat and rant and rave. Art kept putting bigger and bigger locks on the door, but the pimp just kept breaking in. A huge fellow. So Art went out and got a .32 pistol, and the next time the pimp broke in, Art pulled the gun out from under the covers and jammed it into the pimp's mouth and said, "You'll be out of luck the next time you come through that door, Jack." This broke the pimp up. He never went back. The pimp certainly lost a good thing. He ran up a couple of $1,000 worth of bills in her name, charge accounts and the like. They're still paying them off. The pistol's right there beside the bed, just in case the pimp has an attack of amnesia and wants to have his shoes shined in the funeral parlor. When we go up there, he'll drink the wine. She won't. She'll have a little bottle of brandy. She won't offer us any. She drinks about 4 of them a day, never buys a fifth. She always keeps going out and getting another half pint. That's the way she handles it. She doesn't talk very much, and she doesn't make any bad scenes. A good-looking woman. My friend knocked on the door, and we could hear somebody get up off the bed and come to the door. "Who's there?" a man said on the other side. "Me," my friend said in a voice deep and recognizable as any name. "I'll open the door." a simple declarative sentence. He undid about 100 locks and bolts and chains and anchors and steel spikes and canes filled with acid. And then the door opened like a classroom of a great university, and everything was in its proper place. The gun beside the bed, and a small bottle of brandy beside it, an attractive Negro woman. There were many flowers and plants growing in the room. Some of them were on the dresser, surrounded by old photographs. All of the photographs were of white people, including Art when he was young and handsome and looked just like the 1930s. There were pictures of animals cut out of magazines and tacked to the wall with Crayola frames drawn around them and Crayola picture wires drawn holding them to the wall. They were pictures of kittens and puppies. They looked just fine. There was a bowl of goldfish next to the bed, next to the gun. How religious and intimate the goldfish and the gun looked together. They had a cat named 208. They covered the bathroom door with newspaper, and the cat crapped on the newspaper. My friend said that 208 thought he was the only cat left in the world. Not having seen another cat since as a tiny kitten, they never let him out of the room. He was a red cat and very aggressive. When you played with the cat, he really bit you. Stroked 208's fur, and he tried to disembowel your hand as if it were a belly stuffed with extra soft intestines. We sat there and drank and talked about books. Art had owned a lot of books in Los Angeles, but they were all gone now. He told us that he used to spend his spare time in second-hand bookstores buying an old and unusual books when he was in show business, traveling from city to city across America. Some of them were very rare autographed books, he told us, but he had bought them for very little and was forced to sell them for very little. They'd be worth a lot of money to now, he said. The Negro woman sat very quietly studying her brandy. A couple of times she said yes, in a sort of nice way. She used the word yes to its best advantage, when surrounded by no meaning and left all alone from other words. They did their own cooking in the room, and a single hot plate sitting on the floor next to a half a dozen plants, including a peach tree growing in a coffee cap. Their closet was stuffed with food, along with shirts, suits, dresses, were canned goods, eggs, and cooking oil. My friend told me that she was a very fine cook, that she could really cook up a good meal, fancy dishes too, on that single hot plate next to the peach tree. They had a good world going for them. He had such a soft voice and manner that he worked as a private nurse for rich mental patients. He made good money when he worked, but sometimes he was sick himself. He was kind of run down, and she was still working for the telephone company, but she wasn't doing that night work anymore. They were still paying off bills that the pimp had run up. I mean, years had passed, and they were still paying them off. A Cadillac, a hi-fi set, and expensive clothes, that all those things that Negro pimps love to have. At first meeting, an interesting thing happened. I pretended that the cat 208 was named after their room number. Though I knew that their number was in the 300s, the room was on the third floor. It was that simple. I always went to their room following the geography of the hotel Trout Fishing in America rather than its numerical layout. I never knew what the exact number of their room was. I knew secretly it was in the 300s, and that was all. Anyway, it was easier for me to establish order in my mind by pretending that the cat was named after their room number. It seemed like a good idea, and the logical reason for a cat to have the name 208. It, of course, was not true. It was a fib. The cat's name was 208, and the room number was somewhere in the 300s. Where did the name 208 come from? What did it mean? I thought about it for a while, hiding it from the rest of my mind, but I couldn't ruin my birthday by secretly thinking about it too hard. A year later, I found out the true significance of 208's name, purely by accident. My telephone rang one Saturday morning when the sun was shining on the hills. It was a close friend of mine, and he said, "I'm in the slammer. Come and get me out. They're burning black candles around the drunk tank." I went down to the Hall of Justice to bail my friend out and discovered that 208 is the room number of the bail office. It was very simple. I paid $10 for my friend's life and found the original meaning of 208, how it runs like melting snow all the way down the mountainside to a small cat playing in a hotel, trout fishing in America, believing itself to be the last cat in the world, not having seen another cat in such a long time. Totally unafraid. Newspaper spread all over the bathroom floor, and something good cooking in the hot plate. Okay. This is the trout fishing on the street of eternity. Calle de Eternidad. We walked up from Galatao, birthplace of Benito Juarez. Instead of taking the road, we followed a path up along the creek. Some of the boys from school in Galatao told us that up along the creek was a shortcut. The creek was clear but a little milky. As I remember, the path was steep in places. We met people coming down the path because it was really the shortcut, and they were all Indians carrying something. Finally, the path went away from the creek, and we climbed a hill and arrived at the cemetery. It was a very old cemetery and kind of run down with weeds and death growing there like partners in the dance. There was a cobblestone street leading up from the cemetery to the town, pronounced East Lawn. On top of another hill, there was no houses along the street until you got to the town. The hair of the world, the street was very steep as you went up to Ixtlan. There was a street sign that pointed back down toward the cemetery, following every cobblestone with loving care all the way. We were still out of breath from the climb. The sign said, Calle de Eternidad, pointing. I was not always a world traveler visiting exotic places in southern Mexico. Once I was just a kid working for an old woman in the Pacific Northwest. She was in her 90s, and I worked for her on Saturdays and after school and during the summer. Sometimes she would make me lunch, little egg sandwiches with crust cut off as if by a surgeon, and she gave me slices of banana dunked in mayonnaise. The old woman lived by herself in a house that was like a twin sister to her. The house was 4 stories high and had at least 30 rooms, and the old lady was 5 feet high and weighed about 82 pounds. She had a big radio from the 1920s in the living room, and it was the only thing in the house that looked remotely as if it had come from this century. Then there was still a doubt in my mind. A lot of cars, airplanes, and vacuum cleaners, and refrigerators and things that came up from the 1920s look as if they had come across from the 1890s. It's a beauty of our speed that it has done it to them, causing them to age prematurely into the clothes and thoughts of people from another century. The old woman had an old dog, but he hardly counted anymore. He was so old he looked like a stuffed dog. Once I took him for a walk down to the store, and it was just like taking a stuffed dog for a walk. I tied him up to a stuffed fire hydrant, and he pissed on it, but it was only stuffed piss. I went into the store and bought some stuffing for the old lady, maybe a pound of coffee or a quart of mayonnaise. I did things for her like chop the Canadian thistles. During the 1920s, she was motoring in California and her husband stopped the car at a filling station. He told the attendant to fill it up. How about some wildflower seeds? The attendant said. No, her husband said. Gasoline. I know that, sir, the attendant said, but we're giving away wildflower seeds with the gasoline today. All right, her husband said, give us some wildflower seeds then, but be sure and fill the car up with gasoline. Gasoline's what I really want. They'll brighten up your garden, sir. What, the gasoline? No, sir, the flowers. They returned to the northeast, planted the seeds, and they were Canadian thistles. Every year I chopped them down and they always grew back. I poured chemicals on them and they always came back. Curses were music to their roots. A blow on the back of the neck was like a harpsichord to them. Those Canadian thistles were there for keeps. Thank you, California, for your beautiful wildflowers. I chopped them down every year and did other things for her, like mow the lawn with a grim old lawnmower. When I first went to work for her, she told me to be careful with that lawnmower. Some itinerant had stopped at her place a few weeks before, asked for some work so he could rent a hotel room and get something to eat. And she said, you can mow the lawn. Thanks, ma'am. He said he went right out and promptly cut off 3 fingers of his right hand with that medieval lawn machine. Yeah, I was always very careful with that lawnmower, knowing that somewhere on that place the ghosts of 3 fingers were living it up in the grand spook manner. They needed no company from my fingers. My fingers looked just great right there on my hands. I cleaned out her rock garden and deported snakes whenever I found them on her place. She told me to kill them, but I couldn't see any percentage in wasting a garter snake. But I had to get rid of the things because she always promised me she'd have a heart attack if she ever stepped on one of them. So I'd catch them and deport them to a yard across the street where 9 old ladies probably had heart attacks and died from finding those snakes in their toothbrushes. Fortunately, I was never around when their bodies were taken away. I'd seen the blackberry bushes out. I'd cleaned the blackberry bushes out of the lilac bushes. Once in a while, she'd give me some lilacs to take home, and walking down the street holding the lilacs high and proud, like glasses of that famous children's drink, the good flower wine. I'd chop wood for her stove. She cooked on a wood stove and heated the place during the winter with a huge wood furnace that she manned like a captain of a submarine in a dark basement ocean during the winter. In the summer, I'd throw endless cords of wood into her basement until I was silly in the head and everything looked like wood, even clouds in the sky and cars parked on the street and cats. There were dozens of little tiny things that I did for her. I found a lost screwdriver, lost in 1911, picked her a pan full of pie cherries in the spring, and picked the rest of the cherries on the tree for myself. Pruned those goofy, at best half-assed trees in the backyard, the ones that grew beside the old pile of lumber, and I would weed. One early autumn day, she loaned me to a woman next door. I fixed a small leak in the roof of her woodshed. The woman gave me $1 tip and said thank you. Next time it rained. all the newspapers she had been saving for 17 years to start fires with got soaking wet from then on out. I received a sour look every time I went past her house. I was lucky I wasn't lynched. I didn't work for the old lady in the winter. I'd finished the year by last of October, raking up leaves or something, or transporting last muttering garter snakes to winter quarters in the old lady's toothbrush Valhalla across the street. Then she called me on the telephone in the spring. I would always be surprised to hear her little voice, surprised that she was still alive. I'd get on my horse and go out to her place, and the whole thing would begin again, and I'd make a few bucks, stroke the sun-warmed fur of her stuffed dog. One spring day, she had me ascend to the attic and clean up some boxes of stuff and throw out some stuff and put some stuff back into its imaginary proper place. I was up there all alone for 3 hours. It was my first time up there and my last, thank God. The attic was stuffed to the gills with stuff. Everything that's old in this world was up there. I spent most of my time just looking around. An old trunk caught my eye. I unstrapped the straps and unclicked the various clickers and opened the goddamn thing. It was stuffed with old fishing tackle. There were old rods and reels and lines and boots and creels, and there was a metal box full of flies and lures and hooks. Some of the hooks still had worms on them. The worms were years and decades old and petrified to the hooks. The worms now as much a part of the hooks as the metal itself. There was some old trout fishing in America armor in the trunk, and beside a weather-beaten fishing helmet, I saw an old diary. I opened the diary to the first page, and it said, "Trout Fishing Diaries of Alonzo Hagen." And it goes into a thing about, I don't know, 20 or so pages of trips where he went fishing and didn't catch any, Anyway, so he writes this poem at the end. I've had it. I've gone fishing now for 7 years. I haven't caught a single trout. I've lost every trout I ever hooked. They either jump off or twist off or squirm off or break off my leader or flop off or fuck off. I have never even gotten my hands on a trout. For all its frustration, I believe it was an interesting experiment in total loss. But next year, somebody else will have to go trout fishing. Somebody else will have to go out there. That's some stuff from trout fishing in America. Okay. Oh, huh? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Now we're gonna have Juju and Dan with their presentations.